Scott Lauber joins us as the Phillies get ready to take on the Yankees. It's the last warm-up for them. It's Vince Velasquez going for the Phils. Scott, welcome back. How are you, pal?
Hey, how are you?
All is well. And let's start with the weekend that we saw Nola and Wheeler and, the Phillies get a couple of games against somebody else. Did you, Scott, being around this team in summer camp and now seeing them in the 2 live games, did we learn anything about, the team, the roster, the rotation, the lineup? What did you take from those couple of games?
It's hard to take a whole lot. It's like we talk about in spring training. It's a build-up to a season. This just happens to be a shorter build-up. And, I think it was nice to see them play against a different colored uniform for a change after a week and a half of intra-squads where it was Phillies against Phillies and all of that. I think what we learned was Aaron Nola is ready for the start of the season. I mean, if you would, rewound to about 10 days ago or even 2 weeks ago when he was a few days possibility, he would need more time. I think what you saw against the Nationals was that Nola's ready. And we faced a lineup of guys that were, most of the Nats regulars were there to the extent that they're ready for the season because their camp has been disrupted like so many others by COVID and everything else. But Nola looked good. He certainly looks like he's ready for next Friday. I take that as a good sign. I take as a good sign that, and again, find the nearest piece of wood to knock on. But, the Phillies look like their roster's coming together a little bit, whereas some other teams are still dealing with some absences and some delays. You've got Kingery back playing second base. And as I said, Nola's back. And, if they can stay clear of injury and illness, they look like maybe they're getting over some of their problems right as the season's about to begin.
Yeah, and I know, I guess the one question that will be left will be what happens with, I guess, Wheeler, who he was a little erratic last night. I wouldn't say he was his sharpest, and I even think Girardi kind of, made mention of like, hey, I'll remember his last start that he had over this one. But I guess that is going to be a big question mark about what this rotation will look like is whether he will be available this weekend.
Yeah, so in full disclosure, I didn't see him pitch last night. I wasn't there, but I did see Girardi's comments. I did see some highlights. And again, the fact that he ran some deep counts, right? He ran some 3-ball counts and probably didn't go as deep in the game as maybe he'd wanted to or whatnot. I think, again, I don't make that big a deal of that because I think what you're going to see early in the season, both pitching and hitting, is you're going to see some rust. You're going to see some stuff that doesn't really look as sharp as the first week of the season tends to look. You're going to see what looks more like maybe the second half of spring training, I think, on some guys' parts. And, I don't care how much you've thrown during the quarantine or how many pitches you got up to. It's got to be different to face hitters for the first time, really big league hitters, a major league lineup for the first time. And that was really the first time, other than an intra-squad, that Wheeler had done that last night. So, I'm not that concerned about it. But as you say, I mean, he's got, obviously, his wife is due this week, I believe, or end of the week. So that may put his first start into a bit of flux. And I think that's maybe why you're seeing Vince Velasquez pitch tonight as opposed to Jake Arrieta. I also think if they can squeeze in a Wheeler start against the Marlins in the second game, maybe they want Arrieta against the Yankees because they know they probably won't get Wheeler against the Yankees next week. So, there might be multiple factors in there, but and then we'll have to see how many starts Wheeler misses, whether it's 1 start, 2 starts. There's probably going to be a bit of isolation that goes on after the birth of his baby and whatnot before he can rejoin the team. So, last I heard, they weren't expecting it to be a really lengthy absence, but we'll sort of have to see what the protocols state for him in terms of his getting back.
The bullpen is definitely a question mark with this team, and Connor Brogdon came into yesterday's game and was pretty impressive. Do you think that he has potential to make some noise?
I do. I think Connor Brogdon, I think Damon Jones, I think these are, guys who've been in the minor leagues. Had the season started, they would have been in AAA, and I think we might have seen them at some point during the year. And I wrote a story over the late in the week about the Phillies and their proximity to the luxury tax. And we were talking all about the luxury tax in January and February and early March before everything stopped. And one of the things I think that you're seeing in the release of Francisco Liriano, and they have a decision now to make about Anthony Swarzak, these are veteran pitchers that they brought in here on minor league deals. They probably felt when they did that they would only be able to keep one or two of them from a roster standpoint. Well, now they can probably only keep one or two of them, not only from a roster standpoint, but also from a luxury tax standpoint. They're probably going to end up going over anyway. But do you want to go over with a for a veteran reliever who's going to add depth, or do you want to take a shot at a kid like Connor Brogdon or a kid like Damon Jones, who are going to come up, not going to make they're going to make basically the minimum for the luxury tax purposes, and they can, if you trust that they can pitch, and the fact that they're in camp means the Phillies believe that they can contribute at some point this season. I think you're going to see those guys, and I think you're probably going to see them sooner than later. Maybe you'll even see one of them on opening day with the expanded roster and the expanded bullpen. But, certainly Brogdon has looked good. Jones is a lefty, tall lefty who Tommy Hunter last year came back from a rehab assignment and said he saw Damon Jones throw in the bullpen and he thought of Andrew Miller. So, from a physicality standpoint. So, that's a pretty lofty comparison. So I think those are two names that you might as well circle because you're going to see them probably at some point and maybe at some point soon.
Now, how surprised, because when I saw Liriano didn't make it, when he got released, I was pretty shocked, to be honest with you. Was that something that you saw coming yourself?
Not necessarily. I was a little surprised too, but I think two factors there. I think he's left-handed, and it's weird in that they have a lot of lefties. Whether it's Jose Alvarez or Adam Morgan. They've got Damon Jones who could factor in. They've got a bunch of lefties in that bullpen who could help. Liriano's left-handed, so maybe they looked at that and said, it was more of a surplus situation than a guy that they absolutely needed. And then the second part of that is that I believe his big league salary this year, had he been in the big leagues, would have been $1.5 million. Now he wasn't going to make that in reality because they're all making 37% of their salary. But for the luxury tax, they're still applying the full season salaries to that number. And if they're only about $3 million or $3.5 million under the threshold, keeping Liriano would have eaten up half of that available money. So, like I say, they might see some lefties in camp who they view as, reasonably priced alternatives to Liriano, and the step down was not, in their opinion, was not all that great.
Rhys Hoskins had 2 hits last night, and right now he can get any confidence. Any confidence he can get right now is very solid. So, how do you feel he is doing to this point?
I think it's going to be interesting because, I wrote this story about how he made all these changes to his stance. He lowered his hands, and when spring training started way back in February, I had talked to him in January, and he told me a little bit about some changes he was making, and I talked to the new hitting coach, Joe Dillon, and he clued me in a little bit to the hands adjustment and all that. Then I saw him take batting practice, and his hands were way down low. Like, he's a guy who's always had his hands up and over his shoulder, basically, and behind his head. And he had them down in front. And as spring training wore on, they kind of slid upward and a little bit more upward. And when it ended, they were still in front of his body, but they were higher than they had been, but lower than they were for most of his career. And now I'm seeing them sneak up even higher. So it'll be interesting to see where he ends up with that adjustment, whether he gravitates more toward what he used to do. It's whatever I think makes him the most comfortable. And Girardi says he likes the swings that Hoskins has been taking. Again, you can only tell so much from intra-squads and even from some of these, quote-unquote, I guess they're exhibition games. I was going to say, like, pseudo-Grapefruit League games. But, I think it's going to take a little while to sort of a little bit more of a body of work to see, but it's going to be interesting to see if he sticks with that adjustment, because that was something he was talking about a lot in the offseason, and it's already looking like maybe he's sliding back upward. Maybe that ends up being where he feels the most comfortable. We'll have to see.
Bryce Harper hit in the 2 spot yesterday, although there was no Roman Quinn in the lineup. On Saturday, he hit in the 3 spot, which is what we saw him do a lot last season. Do you think that the second hole was in play here, or do you think he's probably going to stick more towards the 3 spot?
No, I think it's in play. Well, that's become a trend in the game the last, 5 years or so, right? That the number 2 spot has become sort of the new number 3 spot. You always used to think of your best hitter being your 3-hole hitter. Mike Trout bats second now, and I think Chris batted second a bit for the Cubs. We saw Harper do it a little bit last year, not too much, but a little bit. Saw him do it a little bit in Washington earlier in his career, bat in the 2-hole. So I'm sure that's something Girardi's kicking around a little bit, especially because you've got McCutchen, his right-handed hitter. It's always nice to come back with a lefty in the 2-hole, and then you can do some things. Maybe Didi Gregorius bats clean up, and you can hit a righty in the 3-hole. I mean, there are a lot of things that they could do with that. It kind of depends. I know that there was some talk last year Harper liked the 3-hole. Again, if that's where he feels most comfortable, there's always other options that you can do with that 2-hole. So they hit Hoskins in that spot a little bit last year. I never liked that much. I always liked him a little bit lower, whether it was the 4, the cleanup spot or whatever. So lots of different things that they can do, but I do think that that's one of the configurations that Girardi's kicking around.
Scott Lauber from the Inquirer is with us. Phillies getting ready to take on the Yankees, and of course, this will be the last chance for them to see someone else. And then on Friday, they will open the season for real. I want to get your take on Arrieta, because he hasn't pitched in any of these games. He's not going to pitch tonight. We haven't really seen much of him since spring training. I remember talking to you back in March or February. It might have been right when they were getting ready, Scott, and you had given us some background on when Arrieta has been healthy, he's pitched pretty well. It just he hasn't been healthy enough to get your bang for your buck. Is he healthy, and is he pitching the way he has pitched when he has been healthy in Philly?
I've seen him twice now in intra-squads, and he's pitched pretty well both times. The first time he pitched really well, got a lot of ground balls, a lot of early contact, which is what you want from him. You want him to get outs early in the count. I don't really care about strikeouts with him. You want him to sink the ball and get balls on the ground, and he did a lot of that in his first start. He did a lot of that in the second one as well. I think he threw 4 innings. I think it was Thursday. I think he gave up a run, and it was in the last inning he pitched. But really, he was in control the whole time. And, the necessary caveats apply, right? It's an inter-squad game, and you really don't know what you're looking at. And, we've seen Arrieta look great in spring trainings before, and then things go sideways. But it is interesting when you look at the last 2 years and you look at when he's pitched well, and he has had stretches where he's pitched well. It's usually been when he's been healthy. I mean, the first half of 2018, he pitched very well, and then he hurt his knee, and it really, the last 6 or 8 weeks of the season were basically a disaster for him. Last year, he pitched pretty well for the first quarter of the season, and then, the bone spur came up, and it was a struggle for him to get through, 3 innings, 4 innings. He wasn't able to throw certain pitches. And again, that's when he had to shut it down because he wasn't pitching very well. So if he's healthy, and maybe this is in a weird way, maybe a 60-game season is good for him, because maybe, if he goes into the season healthy and he looks healthy, maybe he could sustain that for 9 weeks and put something together, because I still believe that Jake Arrieta is the key to the whole thing for them as far as their rotation goes. You know that Nola is going to give you, a good start most of the time. You know that Wheeler is going to give you a good start most of the time. Arrieta as a 3 is kind of a wild card. So if he's a representative average starter in the league, that's a pretty good number 3 starter. If he's below average, then you've got problems.
All right. Well, of course, everybody be keeping an eye on them. The Phillies will be back Friday. They got their final exhibition tonight. Scott Lauber covering the Phils, of course, from the Inquirer, and he joined us, like all guests, on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Thanks, Scott.
Thanks for having me.
As always, great stuff from Scott.